From the outside, Mike had everything anyone could dream of. His corner office on the 20th floor overlooked the city skyline, a view he'd earned after 12 years of climbing the corporate ladder at his architecture firm. Each morning, he'd walk through his beautiful two-story home in the peaceful suburbs, drinking premium coffee from his favorite mug, a gift from his wife on their 10th anniversary. Life seemed perfect, at least on paper. Mike and Anna had been college sweethearts, meeting during their sophomore year when they literally bumped into each other at the campus library. She was studying literature. He was buried in architectural designs. They'd both reached for the same fallen book, their hands touched, and just like in those romantic movies, they fell in love. That wedding was everything they dreamed of. A garden ceremony in spring, surrounded by blooming cherry blossoms and their closest friends and family. They bought their first home together, a fixer-upper that Mike promised to transform with his architectural expertise. Over the years, they renovated it room by room, turning it into the envy of their neighborhood. Their social media feeds were filled with pictures of exotic vacations, fancy dinner dates, and casual Sunday brunches. Mike's colleagues often commented on how lucky he was to have such a perfect marriage. 15 years and still going strong, he would proudly tell anyone who asked. They hosted dinner parties where Anna's gourmet cooking impressed their friends, and Mike would tell funny stories about their college days. But perfection has a way of being deceptive. Like the fresh coat of paint on their living room walls, it covered up what lay beneath. The long hours Mike spent at the office didn't just build his career, they built walls between him and Anna. The dinner parties became less frequent, and when they did happen, the funny college stories were always the same ones, recycled like the bottles they diligently sorted each week. The conversations grew shorter, more practical. Can you pick up the dry cleaning? The gardener's coming tomorrow. I'll be late for dinner again. The silence between these brief exchanges grew longer, heavier, like the pause between thunder and lightning, a warning of the storm to come. The signs were there, hidden in plain sight. The way Anna stopped asking about his day. The way she began taking more solo trips to visit her sister. The growing collection of self-help books on her nightstand that Mike never bothered to notice. The gentle suggestions about couples counseling that he dismissed with a casual, "We don't need that, honey. We're doing great." Their king-size bed felt increasingly empty, despite both of them sleeping in it. They developed an unconscious choreography of avoidance, Mike staying up late finishing work, Anna waking up early to beat the gym crowd. Their schedules danced around each other like planets in separate orbits, connected by gravity but never touching. Yet Mike remained blissfully unaware of these changes, or perhaps he chose not to see them. He was too busy chasing the next promotion, the next project, the next achievement to add to their seemingly perfect life. He mistook Anna's quiet resignation for contentment, her emotional withdrawal for independence. After all, wasn't this what successful marriages looked like? Comfortable, stable, predictable? Their 15th wedding anniversary was approaching, and Mike had already ordered the perfect gift, a pair of diamond earrings that cost more than their first car. He imagined how impressed their friends would be when Anna wore them to their next dinner party. How they would admire his generosity, his thoughtfulness. He never stopped to wonder why Anna had stopped wearing the necklace he gave her last year, or the bracelet from the year before. Little did he know that this anniversary would be different from all the others, that the perfectly wrapped gift waiting for him would shatter the illusion of their perfect life. That sometimes the end of something looks exactly like its beginning, full of surprise, emotion, and life-changing possibility. But for now, he slept peacefully, dreaming of the perfect anniversary breakfast he would prepare, completely unaware of the storm about to break through their carefully maintained facade of perfection. The morning of their 15th anniversary dawned bright and clear. Mike woke up earlier than usual, his mind already running through his carefully planned surprise. The space beside him in bed was empty and cold. Anna had probably gone for her morning run, something that had become her daily routine over the past year. He tiptoed downstairs to the kitchen, wanting to have everything perfect before she returned. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp of birds outside. Mike pulled out the ingredients he'd secretly bought yesterday, fresh blueberries, organic maple syrup, and Anna's favorite premium coffee beans that he'd driven across town to get from that little specialty shop she loved. As he mixed the pancake batter, his mind wandered to their first apartment together, where the kitchen was so small they had to take turns moving around in it. They used to bump into each other constantly, turning every meal preparation into an impromptu dance. Now, in their spacious gourmet kitchen, he realized he couldn't remember the last time they'd cooked together. The jewelry box sat on the counter, wrapped in silver paper with a delicate blue ribbon, the same colors as their wedding theme. Inside were the diamond earrings he'd spent weeks choosing, working with a jeweler to find the perfect pair. They cost nearly as much as a down payment on a car, but Mike believed in grand gestures. What better way to show his love than with something sparkly and expensive? He arranged the breakfast table with precision, the fancy plates they never used, the crystal glasses from their wedding registry, fresh flowers in the center. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, making everything gleam. It looked like a scene from a home decoration magazine, perfect, polished, and somehow untouchable. The sound of the front door opening made him glance at the clock, 7:30 a.m., right on schedule. But instead of coming in wearing her usual running clothes, Anna appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a crisp blue dress and light makeup. Her hair was neatly styled, nothing like the messy ponytail she usually had after her morning exercise. "You're dressed up early," Mike said, trying to hide his surprise. He gestured proudly at the breakfast spread. "Happy anniversary, honey. I made your favorite." Anna stood in the doorway, a hand resting on the frame as if she needed the support. Her eyes took in the scene, the perfect table setting, the stack of blueberry pancakes, the wrapped gift beside her plate. For a moment, something flickered across her face, an emotion Mike couldn't quite read. "This is lovely," she said softly, but she made no move to sit down. Instead, she clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles turning white. Mike noticed she was wearing the pearl earrings her mother had given her, not the diamond studs he bought her last Christmas. "The pancakes will get cold," he said, pulling out her chair with a flourish. "And I got those coffee beans you love from that little place across town." "The one on Oak Street?" Anna asked, finally moving into the room. "I didn't think you remembered which shop I meant. You usually just pick up whatever's on sale at the supermarket." There was something in her tone that made Mike pause, but he pushed the feeling aside. This was their special day, and he was determined to make it perfect. He watched eagerly as she slowly sat down, placing her purse carefully on the empty chair beside her. She was acting strange, almost formal, like she was at a business meeting rather than their anniversary breakfast. "Open your gift," he said, pushing the silver-wrapped box toward her. "I think you're going to love it." Anna looked at the box, then reached for her purse. "Actually," she said, her voice steady but quiet, "I have something for you too. Maybe we should open them at the same time." Mike's heart swelled. She'd remembered to get him a gift too. This was going perfectly. He didn't notice how her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out an elegantly wrapped package from her purse, or how she seemed to be taking slow, measured breaths, as if preparing herself for something. The morning sunlight continued to stream through the windows, the pancakes released wisps of steam into the air, and the perfect breakfast scene was set. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of their kitchen, something Mike couldn't quite grasp yet. In just a few moments, their carefully constructed world would change forever, but for now, he was still smiling, still believing in the perfect life he thought they had. Mike sat at the breakfast table, the excitement of the morning still buzzing in his chest as he watched Anna handle her gift. The silver wrapping paper caught the sunlight, sending tiny reflections dancing across her face. He couldn't wait to see her expression when she opened the earrings. They were exactly the style she used to point out in magazine ads years ago. "Together," he suggested, already starting to tear the corner of his own package. Anna nodded silently, her movements careful and measured as she began unwrapping her gift. The room felt strangely quiet. Even the birds outside seemed to have stopped their morning songs. Mike opened his package first, eager to see what Anna had chosen for him. The wrapping paper was elegant, cream-colored with a subtle texture. Inside was a manila envelope, thick and official-looking. His smile faltered slightly. Maybe it was documents for a surprise vacation. They hadn't traveled together in almost a year. "Go ahead, open the envelope," Anna said softly, her own gift still half wrapped in her hands. There was something in her voice that made him look up. Her face was composed, but her eyes, Her eyes held a mixture of sadness and determination that made his stomach twist. His fingers felt clumsy as he opened the envelope. The first thing he saw was an official letterhead from a law firm he didn't recognize. His eyes scanned the first few lines, the words "petition for dissolution of marriage" jumping out at him like a slap in the face. The room started spinning slightly. The perfectly arranged breakfast table, the carefully chosen flowers, the steam still rising from the coffee cups, everything suddenly felt like a prop in some bizarre play. He looked up at Anna, hoping this was some kind of mistake, a horrible joke maybe. He started, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I don't understand. Are these divorce papers? Anna finally set down her half-unwrapped gift. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They are. The blueberry pancakes he'd made were growing cold between them, the syrup forming a thick pool on the plate. The earrings in their silver box suddenly felt ridiculous, like trying to patch a broken dam with a Band-Aid. But why? He managed to ask. Why today? Why like this? Anna's hands were folded in her lap, but he could see them trembling slightly. Because you would never have listened any other way, Mike. Because I've been trying to talk to you for years, and you've been too busy building our perfect life to notice it was falling apart. The morning sunlight that had seemed so promising just minutes ago now felt harsh and exposing. Mike's mind raced through their recent months together, trying to spot the warning signs he must have missed. The separate bedtimes, the quiet dinners, the solo trips, they all suddenly took on new meaning. We can fix this, he said quickly, pushing the papers aside. Whatever's wrong, we can work on it. I'll do better. I'll be home more. I'll. Open your gift, Anna interrupted gently, nodding toward the silver-wrapped box she'd barely touched. The earrings, they're beautiful, I'm sure. But when was the last time you actually looked at my jewelry box? I haven't worn earrings in over a year. I got my ears re-pierced last summer, but they got infected. I told you about it over dinner one night, but you were answering emails on your phone. Each word felt like another brick being added to the wall between them. Mike stared at the jewelry box, remembering how proud he'd been of choosing the perfect gift. Now it sat there like evidence of everything he'd gotten wrong. This isn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, Anna continued, her voice growing stronger. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've tried counseling on my own. I've tried dropping hints, starting conversations. But you were always too busy with work, too focused on maintaining our perfect image to see that we were drifting apart. The divorce papers sat between them like a physical presence, disrupting the careful symmetry of the breakfast table. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere in the neighborhood, the mundane sound a stark contrast to the way Mike's world was unraveling. I didn't want to hurt you, Anna said, reaching across the table but stopping short of touching his hand. But I couldn't keep pretending. Not for another anniversary, not for another perfectly planned breakfast, not for another expensive gift that shows you don't really know me anymore. Mike sat there, stunned, as the morning sun continued its journey across their kitchen, casting shadows that seemed to grow longer with each passing moment. The divorce papers, the cooling pancakes, the unwrapped gift, all of it blurred together as he tried to process how his perfect anniversary morning had turned into the day his marriage ended. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the heavy silence that followed. Mike stared at the divorce papers, his mind struggling to process what was happening. The perfectly arranged breakfast table now felt like a museum display of their marriage, beautiful to look at but cold and untouchable. I need you to understand, Anna began, her voice gentle but firm. This isn't about the earrings, or this breakfast, or any single moment. It's about all the moments that led us here. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for what needed to be said. Mike watched as she stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at their carefully maintained garden. Remember last summer, when I tried to talk to you about how lonely I felt? She turned back to face him. You were sitting right there in that same chair, checking your work emails. You nodded and said, "Uh-huh," 3 times without looking up. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He did remember that evening, or at least, he remembered sitting there answering important client emails. He hadn't realized it was anything more than casual conversation. I started going to therapy 6 months ago, Anna continued, wrapping her arms around herself, every Wednesday at 2 p.m. I told you about it over dinner one night. You said, "That's nice, honey," and asked me to pass the salt. Each revelation felt like another crack appearing in the perfect image Mike had maintained of their marriage. He thought about all the Wednesday afternoons when Anna wasn't home. He'd assumed she was at her book club or running errands. "But you seemed fine," he protested weakly. "We were fine. We have this beautiful house. Our friends always say what a perfect couple we are." Anna's laugh held no humor. "Perfect? Mike, when was the last time we really talked? Not about groceries or bills or social plans, but really talked. When was the last time you asked me about my dreams, my fears, what I want from life?" Mike opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. He couldn't remember. 3 months ago, Anna continued, her voice shaking slightly, "I dyed my hair. Just the ends, a subtle purple. I wanted to try something different, something that made me feel alive again. You didn't notice for 2 weeks, and when you finally did, you asked if it was for a costume party." The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting different shadows across their kitchen. The pancakes sat forgotten, a mockery of the perfect breakfast he planned. Mike noticed a small drop of syrup had dripped onto the divorce papers, leaving a sticky stain on the corner. "Last year," Anna said, returning to her chair but not sitting down, "I started writing again. Remember how I used to write in college? How I talked about wanting to be an author someday? I finished a whole novel. It's sitting in my desk drawer upstairs. I tried to tell you about it 4 times, but you were always too busy with work deadlines or too tired from long days at the office." Mike felt sick. He vaguely remembered Anna mentioning something about writing, but he dismissed it as a hobby, something to keep her occupied while he built their future. "The thing is," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "I stopped expecting you to notice. I stopped trying to have real conversations. I stopped sharing my thoughts and feelings because it hurt less than sharing them and realizing you weren't really listening." She picked up her purse from the chair, pulling out a small notebook. "I've been keeping track of all the times I tried to reach out, all the conversations I attempted to start. At first, it was just to show my therapist I wasn't imagining things. But look." She opened the notebook and slid it across the table. Page after page was filled with dates and brief notes. Tried to discuss feeling disconnected. Too busy with project deadline. Suggested couples counseling. Said we don't need it. Told about finishing my book. Nodded and changed subject to work promotion. "I'm not showing you this to hurt you," Anna said softly. "I'm showing you because I need you to understand that this isn't a sudden decision. It's not a dramatic gesture. It's the result of years of growing apart, of becoming strangers who share a beautiful house but not a life." Mike stared at the notebook, at Anna's neat handwriting documenting the slow death of their marriage. Each entry was like a tiny epitaph for moments he'd missed, conversations he'd avoided, connections he'd failed to maintain. The perfect life he thought they had was crumbling around him like a sandcastle hit by a wave. All the expensive gifts, the fancy house, the successful career, none of it mattered if he'd lost the person he was supposed to share it with. The hotel room felt sterile and empty, nothing like the warm home he'd left behind. Mike sat on the edge of the bed, loosening his tie after another long day at work. It had been 3 weeks since that fateful anniversary breakfast, but the memory of it still played in his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. He'd packed quickly that day, grabbing whatever clothes were closest, his laptop and basic toiletries. Now, living out of a suitcase in a mid-range hotel, he found himself surrounded by dress shirts, but without simple things like his favorite coffee mug or the book he'd been meaning to read for months. The first few nights, he buried himself in work, answering emails until 2 a.m., taking early morning meetings, anything to avoid thinking about what had happened. But in the quiet moments, like now, memories kept flooding back, taking on new meaning in light of Anna's words. He remembered a night last winter when he'd come home late from work. Anna was curled up on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders, staring out the window at the falling snow. "Do you ever wonder if we're just going through the motions?" she'd asked. He'd mumbled something about being tired and headed upstairs to check more emails. Rolling over on the hotel bed, he picked up his phone and scrolled through their photos from the past year. There were dozens of pictures of their house, their vacations, their dinner parties, but in most of them, they weren't looking at each other. There was always a slight distance between them, even when they were standing side by side. The hotel room's Mii fridge hummed in the background as Mike opened his laptop, not to check work emails this time, but to look at his calendar from the past year. Anna's words about her therapy sessions echoed in his mind, every Wednesday at 2 p.m. He scrolled through month after month, realizing he'd been scheduling client meetings during lunch breaks that could have been spent with his wife. On his nightstand lay the notebook Anna had shown him, which she'd insisted he keep. He'd been reading a few pages each night, each entry hitting him like a small hammer to the heart. Tried to talk about having kids. M said, not now, big project coming up. Suggested weekend getaway. M said, maybe next month. Made M's favorite dinner. He worked late, came home at 10. The thing that struck him most was how patient she'd been, how many times she'd tried to reach out. He'd always prided himself on being a problem solver at work, on catching issues before they became crisis. How had he missed the countless signs that his marriage was in trouble? A text notification lit up his phone. A message from his younger brother. Hey, how are you holding up? Mike had been avoiding family calls, but his brother's simple question broke something inside him. He found himself typing out a long response, explaining everything that had happened, everything he was realizing. I keep thinking about last Thanksgiving, he wrote. Remember when Anna was telling everyone about her idea for a children's book? I cut her off to talk about my new project at work. You gave me this look, but I didn't understand it then. I get it now. The hotel room's air conditioning clicked on, making him realize he'd been sitting in the dark. He got up to turn on a lamp and caught his reflection in the mirror. He looked tired, older somehow. When had he started wearing his stress like a second skin? He thought about the morning routines he'd taken for granted, Anna's humming while she made tea, the way she'd leave sticky notes with random thoughts or quotes on the bathroom mirror, how she used to touch his shoulder gently when she passed behind his chair. All these small moments of connection he'd let slip away while chasing the next big career milestone. Opening his work laptop again, he stared at his email inbox. Hundreds of messages marked urgent, demanding his immediate attention. How many conversations with Anna had he missed while responding to these? How many moments of connection had he sacrificed for the sake of being the perfect employee? He started drafting an email to his boss, something he'd never done before. I need to take some personal time. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. For years, he'd been the guy who never took vacation, who answered emails on Christmas morning. Now he was realizing the cost of that dedication. The night outside his hotel window was quiet except for the occasional car passing by. In their home, this would be the time when Anna would be reading in bed, her reading glasses perched on her nose, maybe sharing random interesting facts from her book. He used to find it mildly annoying when she interrupted his evening email checks. Now he would give anything to hear her voice saying, "Hey, listen to this interesting part." The therapist's office wasn't what Mike had expected. No leather couch, no dim lighting, just a comfortable room with soft blue walls and two ordinary chairs facing each other. He'd resisted coming here for weeks, but after reading through Anna's notebook for the 20th time, he finally made the call. "What brings you here today?" the therapist asked. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a notepad balanced on her knee. Mike had rehearsed his answer in the car, but now the words stuck in his throat. "My wife," he started, then corrected himself. "My soon-to-be ex-wife gave me divorce papers on our anniversary." Saying it out loud still felt surreal. I didn't see it coming. Or maybe I did, and I just wasn't paying attention. Over the next hour, Mike found himself talking more than he had in months. He talked about his childhood, watching his father work 60-hour weeks to provide for the family. He talked about his first job out of college, where his boss told him success meant being available 24/7. He talked about the pride he felt in buying their dream house, not realizing he was turning it into an empty museum of their failing marriage. "When was the last time you did something just for joy?" the therapist asked. Mike opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. He couldn't remember. Week after week, he returned to that blue-walled office. Each session peeled back another layer of understanding. He learned about emotional availability, about the difference between hearing and listening, about how success at work didn't automatically mean success in life. One particularly difficult session, he brought Anna's notebook with him. "I keep reading it," he admitted. Sometimes late at night in my hotel room, I read about all the moments I missed, all the conversations I ignored. It's like reading a book about a stranger. This workaholic husband who was so focused on building the perfect life that he forgot to actually live it. The therapist nodded. Tell me about your typical day before all this happened. Mike described his routine, waking up early to check emails, rushing to the office, back-to-back meetings, working through lunch, coming home late, more emails before bed. As he spoke, he realized something. I don't even know what Anna did during her days, he said quietly. I mean, I knew the basics. She volunteered at the library. She was writing something, but I never really asked about it. I was always too busy telling her about my latest project or my next big deadline. One session focused on a photo he'd found while packing some things from their house. It was from their 3rd anniversary. They were having a picnic in the park, both laughing as they tried to stop the wind from blowing away their napkins. We used to do spontaneous things like that, Mike said, staring at the photo. When did I start thinking that expensive restaurants and fancy gifts were more important than just being together? The therapist helped him understand how his drive for success had become a shield, a way to avoid deeper emotional connections. You've been treating your marriage like another project to manage, she explained. But relationships don't work like business deals. You can't just throw money or gifts at them and expect them to thrive. During one session, Mike brought up the moment that had been haunting him. Last Christmas, Anna mentioned feeling disconnected. Instead of talking about it, I bought her an expensive necklace. I thought I was solving the problem, but I was just putting a price tag on something that needed time and attention instead. Slowly, painfully, Mike began to understand the difference between providing and being present. He learned that his workaholic tendencies weren't just a path to success, they were a way of avoiding the messier, more vulnerable parts of life. Your work ethic isn't the problem, his therapist told him. It's that you've been using it as a substitute for emotional connection. When Anna tried to talk about feeling lonely, you worked harder to buy nicer things. When she suggested couples counseling, you stayed late at the office instead of facing the issue. These revelations didn't come easily. Each understanding was like a small earthquake, shaking the foundation of everything Mike had believed about himself. He'd always thought being a good husband meant being a good provider. Now he was learning that provision without presence was like offering someone a beautifully wrapped empty box. In his hotel room at night, he started journaling, something his therapist suggested. He wrote about his regrets, his fears, and most importantly, his realizations. I spent 15 years building a life that looked perfect on the outside, he wrote one evening. But I forgot to build the connections that would make it meaningful on the inside. The hardest part was accepting that these insights might have come too late to save his marriage. But for the first time in his life, Mike was learning to value growth over achievement, understanding over success. His therapist called it doing the work, not the kind of work that earned promotions, but the kind that helped him become a better, more aware person. 6 months after that life-changing anniversary breakfast, Mike sat in his lawyer's office, pen hovering over the final divorce papers. The room was quiet except for the gentle ticking of a wall clock and the soft hum of the air conditioning. This moment felt different from when he'd first seen the papers on his breakfast table, less shocking, but somehow more profound. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the hotel room that had become home, the therapy sessions that had opened his eyes, the long nights spent reading and rereading Anna's notebook until the pages were worn at the edges. Each entry had become a lesson in what he'd missed, what he needed to learn. The diamond earrings he'd bought for their anniversary still sat in their box, tucked away in his hotel room drawer. He'd thought about returning them, but kept them instead as a reminder. A symbol of how he'd confuse expensive gifts with genuine connection. Last week, he'd run into Anna at their favorite coffee shop. It wasn't planned. He'd stopped in for his morning coffee, and there she was, sitting by the window with her laptop open, probably working on her second novel. The first one had just been accepted by a publisher. He'd heard the news through his brother. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, he saw her as she must have seen him all those years. A familiar stranger, someone who knew all her habits but had forgotten to know her heart. She gave him a small wave, and he noticed she was wearing the purple streaks in her hair again. "How are you?" he'd asked, approaching her table. The question felt different now, No longer the automatic greeting he used to toss out while checking his phone, but a genuine inquiry about her well-being. "Good," she'd replied, and he could see that it was true. There was a lightness about her that had been missing in their final months together. "I heard you're seeing someone," she added. "A therapist, I mean." He nodded, settling into the chair she gestured to. "Yeah, every Tuesday. Should have done it years ago, when you first suggested it." The words weren't meant as a guilt trip or a plea, just a simple acknowledgement of truth. They talked for almost an hour, the coffee growing cold. He told her about his realizations in therapy, about learning to listen instead of just hearing. She told him about her book, her eyes lighting up as she described the characters she'd created. It was the kind of conversation they should have had years ago, open, honest, without one person checking emails or thinking about work deadlines. Now, sitting in the lawyer's office, Mike thought about that coffee shop conversation. It had felt like closure, but also like opening a door to something new, not a rekindling of their marriage, but a chance to become better people separately than they had been together. He signed his name on the final page, the pen scratching softly against the paper. His lawyer had another client waiting, but Mike asked for a moment alone. He pulled out Anna's notebook one last time, flipping through the pages that had become so familiar. The last entry, written the day before their anniversary, read, "Maybe the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go." He hadn't understood that 6 months ago. Now he did. Walking out of the lawyer's office, Mike felt the spring sunshine on his face. His phone buzzed with work emails, but for the first time in his career, they didn't feel urgent. Instead, he thought about the plans he'd made for the evening, a cooking class he'd signed up for, something he'd always wanted to try but had been too busy for. He'd moved into a small apartment last month, decorating it himself instead of hiring someone. The walls held photos of his family, his friends, moments that mattered. His laptop stayed in his office after work hours now. His phone had an automatic Do Not Disturb setting after 7 p.m. These changes hadn't saved his marriage, but they were saving him. Each small shift, learning to cook, joining a book club, actually listening when people spoke, was like placing a brick in the foundation of his new life. That evening, as he chopped vegetables in his cooking class, making plenty of mistakes but laughing about them, Mike realized something. Anna's anniversary gift of divorce papers hadn't been an ending. It had been a wake-up call, a chance to learn who he was beyond his job title and bank account. He'd spent 15 years building the perfect life, only to discover that perfection wasn't what he needed. What he needed was authenticity, connection, and the courage to be present in his own life. The divorce papers that had seemed like a tragedy 6 months ago had actually been the first page of a new chapter. As he drove home that night, past the house he used to share with Anna, he didn't feel the same ache he'd felt months ago. Instead, he felt grateful for the lessons, grateful for the growth, and most of all, grateful for the chance to start again, this time with his eyes and heart wide open.